Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going way back to the 18th century.
Ooh, exciting.
I know, right? It's all about Mary Wollstonecraft.
Of course, the OG feminist icon.
Exactly. We're tackling her masterpiece, A Vindication of the Rights of
A
Woman.
total game changer.
For sure. And
Yeah.
we've got a bunch of scholarly analyses to help us unpack it all.
Nice. Context is key, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
So before we jump in, what's the mission here? Why should our listeners, especially those UPSC aspirants out there, care about Mary Wollstonecraft?
Okay, well, let's be real for a second. International relations, it's all about power dynamics between states, right?
No, totally.
But here's the thing. Those power dynamics, guess what? They're often shaped by the same ideas about gender and social hierarchies. That Wollstonecraft was challenging way back when.
Whoa, I see what you mean. So by understanding her arguments, we're actually getting a deeper understanding of like the DNA of global politics.
You got it. It's like looking under the hood. And for UPSC students, that's pure gold.
Okay, yeah, makes
Yeah.
sense. You need that deep analysis for those exams.
Absolutely. Wollstonecraft, she gives you that historical foundation.
All right, I'm ready. Let's unpack her core arguments then. What was she actually fighting for?
So, at the heart of it all, Wollstonecraft's work, it's a powerful plea for equality
Equality
between men and women, of course.
Right, of course.
And it was a direct challenge to those traditional patriarchal structures that were so dominant back then.
Okay, and just to set the scene, what was the intellectual climate like back then?
Well, she was hugely influenced by the Enlightenment. Remember that period?
Vaguely refresh my memory.
Think John Locke, reason, individual liberty, natural rights.
Right, the idea that everyone's born with inherent rights.
Exactly. And Wollstonecraft, she took those ideas and she applied them to women's lives.
That's so radical for her time.
Totally. She was basically saying, hey, if reason and liberty apply to men, they should apply to women too.
Makes sense. It's only fair.
Right. But back then, that was a revolutionary concept.
So how did she view women's roles in society then? Was she like down with marriage? Abolish the family?
Not quite. I mean, she believed women should be wives and mothers.
Okay, traditional roles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But she didn't see those roles as limiting or the only options for women.
So what else did she envision for women?
Her vision was much broader. She championed education,
Okay.
economic independence, legal protection for women.
So basically full participation in society.
Exactly.
So she wasn't advocating for like a complete societal upheaval.
Not exactly. More like pushing for change within the existing structure.
Strategic.
Right. For example, she specifically recommended things like shared property rights within marriage.
Interesting. So both partners have a stake.
Exactly. And she believed women should have the ability to support themselves financially.
Smart.
Yeah.
Very forward thinking.
Right. Now, it's important to note that while Wollstonecraft primarily focused on middle-class women, she didn't completely ignore the struggles of working-class women.
Oh, it's good to know. Did she
What?
write about them specifically?
Yeah, in her novel, The Wrongs of Woman, she directly addresses the oppression they faced.
Got it. So she was aware of those different experiences.
For sure, even if her main focus was on middle-class women.
Okay, one thing that keeps coming up, though, it's education. Why was that so central to her arguments?
Wollstonecraft believed that education was the absolute cornerstone of women's liberation.
Not just any education, though, right?
Right, it had to be an education focused on cultivating reason and intellect.
So the same human virtues as men.
Exactly. She argued that denying women access to this kind of education was like clipping their wings.
Preventing them from reaching their full potential.
Precisely. There's this powerful quote where she says, women shouldn't be educated to be some fanciful half-being.
Oof, yeah, she's calling out centuries of reducing women to just decorative role.
Exactly. She believed women were just as capable of rational thought and intellectual development as men. And this idea has massive implications for international relations, particularly in areas like development and human rights.
Hold on, break that down for me.
Mhm.
How does education for women connect to things like development and human rights on a global scale?
Well, think about it. If you empower women through education, you're essentially empowering entire communities.
Okay, I can see that.
They can participate more fully in the economy, make informed decisions about their lives, advocate for their rights.
So it's not just individual empowerment, it's societal transformation.
Exactly. And for our UPSC listeners, this connection between gender equality and development, it's crucial.
Yeah, I can see that coming up in the exam for sure.
Absolutely. It shows up in tons of international agreements and policy frameworks.
All right, so we've got Wollstonecraft fighting for women's intellectual development. What about her views on marriage and family? Did she see those institutions as inherently oppressive?
That's where it gets really interesting. She didn't reject marriage outright,
Okay, so not totally radical.
but she had a very specific vision for what it should be: a genuine partnership,
Based on?
mutual respect, compassion, and intellectual companionship.
Not just traditional roles and obligations.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She believed marriage should be a space for intellectual growth and shared decision-making.
Interesting. Now, what about her own personal life?
Well, her relationship with Godwin was pretty unconventional for the time.
How so?
They had a daughter out of wedlock and only married shortly before Wollstonecraft's death.
Wow, so even she couldn't fully escape the social pressures of her era.
It's true. Even the most radical thinkers are products of their time.
That's a good reminder.
Yeah.
So she had this vision for a more egalitarian marriage.
Yeah.
What about motherhood? Did she see it as like a burden?
Not at all. She considered motherhood a vital role,
Okay.
but one that demanded proper education and preparation.
So knowledge and critical thinking are important for being a good mother.
Exactly. She argued that for women to excel as mothers, they needed those skills to make informed choices.
Interesting. So she wasn't diminishing motherhood. She was elevating it.
Precisely. And again, that theme of education as empowerment, it weaves through all her arguments.
I'm seeing a pattern here. This is all incredibly insightful. But I'm curious how Wollstonecraft's ideas specifically link to the study of international relations. It feels like a bit of a leap from 18th century feminist thought to the complexities of global politics.
I hear you. But that's where it gets really exciting for all those UPSC folks out there. Think about it. We deal with all sorts of issues in international relations.
Conflict, poverty, human rights, diplomacy.
Exactly. And Wollstonecraft's work. It lays the foundation for understanding how deeply gender is intertwined with all of those issues.
Okay, give me an example. How does understanding her arguments about, say, individual rights and education help me analyze a conflict in some faraway country?
All right, imagine you're trying to understand the root causes of a conflict.
Yeah.
Often you'll find that gender inequality plays a huge role. Maybe women are denied access to education.
Or excluded from political processes.
Yes. Or subjected to violence and discrimination.
These are all echoes of the issues Wollstonecraft was fighting against.
Exactly. By understanding her work, we're actually getting a framework for analyzing power dynamics and social structures that contribute to global conflicts.
Wow, I see what you mean. So studying someone like Wollstonecraft, it's not just some abstract intellectual exercise. It's about getting a deeper, more nuanced understanding of how the world actually works.
You got it. And for those UPSC aspirants, this is crucial. The exam demands that you think critically. Connect the dots between different ideas, analyze complex global issues, and guess what? Wollstonecraft. She gives you that intellectual toolkit.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, from Wollstonecraft's challenge to patriarchy to her emphasis on reasoned education and equality. But I know there's a lot more to explore, especially when it comes to her lasting impact on feminist thought and its relevance to international relations today.
You're absolutely right. And that's where we'll pick up in the next part of our deep dive. We'll trace the evolution of feminist ideas from Wollstonecraft to contemporary thinkers like Carol Pateman.
Ooh, looking forward to that one.
And we'll explore how their work helps us analyze global politics in the 21st century.
This is all incredibly fascinating. I can't wait to see where we go next. But before we move on, I have a question that's been nagging at me. Wollstonecraft was writing over 200 years ago. Are her ideas really still relevant in today's world? I mean, haven't we moved past those debates about women's roles and equality?
That's a great question, and one that we'll tackle head on in the next part of our deep dive. What's fascinating is that while the context has obviously changed, the core issues Wollstonecraft raised, they're still very much with us.
Really?
Oh, yeah. We're still grappling with questions of power equality and the role of gender in shaping both domestic and international politics.
I'm starting to see how her work is like this foundation for understanding a lot of the challenges we face today. I guess I'll have to wait for the next part to really get into that.
You got it. We'll pick up right where we left off and explore how Wollstonecraft's legacy continues to shape the world we live in.
Can't wait. All right, folks, that's it for part 1 of our deep dive into Mary Wollstonecraft. Make sure to stay tuned for part 2, where we'll delve even deeper into the evolution of feminist thought and its impact on international relations. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. It helps more UPSC aspirants find us and join the conversation. See you in part 2.
Welcome back to the deep dive into Mary Wollstonecraft and her legacy.
I'm ready to go deeper. Last time, we uncovered her core arguments. The challenge to patriarchy, her focus on reason and education, that vision for a more egalitarian society.
Right. And today. We're tracing the evolution of those feminist ideas.
Ooh, okay. From the 18th century to today.
You got it. We'll see how her ideas influence later thinkers and activists.
Perfect. So who are we starting with?
Well, one figure that immediately comes to mind is John Stuart Mill.
John Stuart Mill.
The philosopher.
The one and only. He was a huge advocate for women's rights in the 19th century.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize that. So was he like building directly on Wollstonecraft's ideas? Oh, absolutely. He saw her as a foundational figure. He even co-authored a book on gender equality with his wife, Harriet Taylor Mill.
Really? What was it called?
The Subjection of Women.
Wow, that title's pretty direct.
No kidding. And in it, he echoed Wollstonecraft's emphasis on reason and individual liberty as the basis for women's rights.
Okay, so similar ideas.
But he also expanded on her arguments. He explored the economic and political dimensions of women's oppression.
Oh, interesting. So he was connecting gender inequality to the broader structures of society.
Exactly. He argued that the subordination of women wasn't just a personal or social issue. It was systemic, rooted in the very fabric of political and economic power.
Whoa, okay. That feels very relevant to international relations.
Absolutely. Denying women the right to vote or own property, it wasn't just about limiting their choices.
It was about maintaining a system that kept women in a subordinate position.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And this insight. It's key for understanding international relations.
How so?
Well, many feminist scholars argue that the power dynamics between men and women within states, they're reflected in the relationships between nations.
Oh, wow. That's a profound connection.
It is. Understanding feminist critiques of power within societies can help us analyze power dynamics on the global stage.
I see what you mean. It's like a whole new layer of complexity.
Exactly. It's not just about traditional power structures either. It's about how ideas about gender shape our understanding of conflict diplomacy, international development.
This is really making me rethink how I approach international relations.
That's the beauty of bringing in different perspectives.
It is. So we talked about John Stuart Mill. Are there any other thinkers who picked up on Wollstonecraft's ideas?
You know who's really interesting? Jane Austen.
Jane Austen, the romance novelist.
Yep. But her work actually engages with a lot of the same themes that Wollstonecraft did.
Seriously. I always thought of Austen as more of a social commentator, someone who made fun of the customs of her time.
Oh, she definitely did that. But think about the challenges her female characters face. Yeah.
Limited education.
Right. Financial dependence on men, the pressure to marry well.
Those were all issues Wollstonecraft was fighting against.
Exactly. Austen might not have been writing explicit political treatises, but she was using fiction to expose those limitations on women's lives.
Wow, I never thought about it that way. So she was contributing to feminist thought through her novels.
In a way, yes. And this is important for our UPSC listeners out there. Literature, art, even pop culture, they can be powerful tools for understanding these ideas.
Interesting. They reflect the world around us.
They do. Okay, so we've got this line of feminist thought from Wollstonecraft to Mill to Austen.
It's like an ongoing conversation.
Exactly. A constant evolution of ideas. And that brings us to another key figure, Carol Pateman.
Carol Pateman. Okay, I've heard of her. Didn't she write about the sexual contract?
You got it, The Sexual Contract. Her book really shook things up.
Remind me, what was her main argument?
She argued that even in societies that appear to be based on equality, there's this hidden sexual contract that underpins everything.
Okay, I need you to unpack that. What does
Yeah.
she mean by sexual contract?
It's complex, but basically she's saying that the foundation of modern society ideas about citizenship, individual rights, it all rests on this unspoken agreement where women are defined by their sexuality and their ability to have children.
So even if women can vote, own property, there's still this underlying assumption that their primary role is domestic, as wives and mothers.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond formal equality and seeing the deeper assumptions that shape our institutions and social norms.
This is mind-blowing.
Yeah.
How does this connect back to Wollstonecraft?
Well, she might not have used that term, but she was already challenging those assumptions back in the 18th century. Remember how she criticized the idea that women's happiness depended on men?
Yeah. And her push for women's economic independence.
Exactly. She was laying the groundwork for questioning the very basis of that sexual contract.
Wow, I see the connection. So Wollstonecraft's call for gender equality and her belief in women's intellectual capabilities, they're like a direct challenge to this sexual contract.
You got it. They challenge the assumptions that perpetuate male dominance.
This is all starting to click for me. It's like we're tracing a lineage of feminist thought, each thinker building on the work of those who came before.
That's a powerful way to put it. And it's why studying someone like Wollstonecraft is so crucial for UPSC aspirants.
Because it provides that historical foundation.
Exactly. For understanding these complex debates about gender and power that are still so relevant today.
Okay, this has been incredibly insightful. I'm starting to see how feminist thought is really about understanding the fabric of power that shapes the world. But I'm still grappling with this question: how do these theories actually play out on the global stage? How do they help us analyze real-world situations?
Well, think about all the issues we deal with in international relations, conflicts, poverty, human rights violations, environmental crises.
Right, those are huge.
And feminist theories force us to ask some tough questions.
Like what kind of questions?
Whose voices are being heard? Whose interests are being served by current policies? Are there underlying power imbalances that are contributing to these problems?
So it's not just about adding women into the mix or having more female leaders.
It's about fundamentally changing how we approach these global challenges.
By recognizing how deeply gender is embedded in all of them.
Exactly. It's about understanding how traditional power structures, the same ones Wollstonecraft was challenging, often shape international relations and perpetuate inequalities.
I'm starting to see how studying feminist thought isn't just some niche academic pursuit. It's about understanding the very forces that shape our world and finding new ways to create a more just and equitable system.
That's a fantastic insight. And for you UPSC folks, this is essential.
To think about gender in everything.
Yes. You need to analyze those power dynamics, critically assess different perspectives on global issues, and understand how seemingly domestic issues like gender equality are deeply intertwined with international relations.
Wow. This deep dive has been a real eye-opener. But I have to admit I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. There's so much to grapple with.
I hear you. These are complex ideas, and it takes time to really absorb them and apply them. But the key takeaway is this. Engaging with feminist thought isn't just about ticking a box on your UPSC syllabus. It's about developing a more nuanced and critical understanding of the forces that shape our world.
Okay, that's reassuring. I'm starting to see how it all fits together. But before we move on to the final part, I have a question that's been lingering in my mind. We've talked a lot about the strengths of feminist thought and its relevance to international relations. But what about the critiques? Are there weaknesses or limitations that we need to be aware of?
Absolutely. That's an excellent question, and a crucial one to consider. Like any theoretical framework, feminist thought has its own debates and critiques.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Not quite. And that's what we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive.
Perfect.
We'll explore some of the key critiques of these feminist approaches to international relations and how these different perspectives enrich our understanding.
I'm really looking forward to that discussion. Feels like we're going even deeper.
We are. We'll pick up right where we left off and dive into those critiques and debates. But before we move on, a quick reminder to our listeners. If you're finding this deep dive insightful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and share this episode with your fellow UPSC aspirants. The more the merrier.
All right, folks, that's a wrap for part 2. Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll tackle those critiques head on and explore the future of feminist thought in international relations. See you on part 3. All right, deep divers, welcome back. It's the final part of our exploration of Mary Wollstonecraft.
And how her ideas shaped feminist thought and international relations.
Exactly. Last time we left off with this question of critiques of feminist approaches. I'm ready to dive into that.
Okay, great. So remember how we talked about different strands of feminist thought?
Yeah, like liberal feminism, intersectionality.
Right. Well, one common critique is that some forms of feminism, particularly liberal feminism, they tend to focus mainly on the experiences of white middle-class women.
Okay, so the argument is that it doesn't always represent the experiences of all women.
Exactly. Critics argue that it can sometimes lead to a pretty narrow view of gender inequality.
And potentially miss the unique challenges faced by women of color or women in developing countries.
Exactly. And LGBTQ plus individuals, too. It's about recognizing that one size doesn't fit all.
That makes sense. So how has feminist thought evolved to address those critiques?
That's where intersectionality comes in.
Right, the idea that gender intersects with other social categories.
Yes, like race, class, sexual orientation, nationality.
So it's about understanding how those different forms of oppression can overlap.
Exactly. It helps us move beyond simplistic understandings of gender.
And analyze how power operates in more nuanced ways.
Precisely. This has been huge for how we study international relations, especially in areas like human rights and development.
This is making me realize how much more there is to learn about this topic.
Oh, absolutely. Feminist thought. It's constantly evolving and expanding to address these complex issues.
It's pretty inspiring to see. So let's bring this back to our UPSC aspirants. What are some key takeaways from all of this? How can they apply these ideas to their studies and ultimately to their work in international relations?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is this: understanding gender. It's essential for anyone working in international relations.
Not just about women's issues.
It's about understanding the power dynamics that shape global politics.
So recognizing how gender is embedded in everything from conflict to diplomacy to development.
You got it. And Wollstonecraft's work, it gives us that framework for understanding those connections.
Her emphasis on reason, education, and individual rights.
It all still resonates today.
It's like she gave us this toolkit to challenge those power structures.
I love that analogy. A toolkit for building a more just world. Now, for those prepping for the UPSC, remember, engaging with feminist thought isn't about memorizing theories. It's about understanding how these forces shape the world.
It's about using those critical thinking skills to analyze every issue.
Whether it's a conflict or a policy debate at the UN, always ask yourself, how does gender play a role here?
That's a great point. Now, before we wrap up, I have one final question. We've talked a lot about Wollstonecraft and feminist thought, but how should our listeners continue exploring these ideas? Where do they go from here?
That's a great question. I'd say the most important thing is to stay curious. Read widely, engage with diverse perspectives. There are tons of amazing feminist scholars out there.
Like bell hooks,
Yeah.
Edith Butler.
Yes, and so many more. Look into different feminist theories: post-colonial feminism, black feminism, queer theory.
It's about finding the approaches that resonate with you.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to challenge your own assumptions. Remember, we're all learning and growing together.
That's such an important reminder. This deep dive has been truly eye-opening and inspiring. I've learned so much.
Me too. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you and with all our listeners.
And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of Mary Wollstonecraft and feminist thought. We hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity and given you new tools to analyze the complexities of international relations. Remember to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. It helps more UPSC aspirants find us. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing and those ambitions soaring.